Linda, where do they get their shot? In Lethbridge?
Exhibition.
Is now joining.
Good.
Yeah, they're booked there at the exhibition and actually booked for Friday.
Cool.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's 1:30. Welcome to the Economic Standing Policy Committee of Lethbridge City Council. We'll start with the Acknowledgement Statement. The City of Lethbridge acknowledges that we are gathered on the lands of the Blackfoot people of the Canadian Plains and pays respect to the Blackfoot people past, present, and future, while recognizing and respecting their cultural heritage, beliefs, and relationships to the land. The City of Lethbridge is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. We'll now conduct a roll call.
Thank you, Mayor Spearman. Councillor Campbell.
Present.
Councillor Carlson.
Present.
Councillor Kaufman.
Present.
Councillor Crowson.
Here.
Councillor Morrow.
Yeah.
Councillor Parker.
Here.
Acting Mayor Hagan. Deputy Mayor Miyashiro. Mayor Spearman.
Present.
Acting Mayor Hagan. I see
Present.
you on there. Deputy Mayor Miyashiro. Okay. And we have Mayor Spearman in the chamber along with myself and Janessa. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now ask for adoption of the agenda. Are there any objections? Any additions? Deletions?
Mayor Spearman, Councillor Kaufman.
Yes.
Thank you. Given the conversation that Council had yesterday regarding participation with the exhibition, can we maybe add the agenda about just a simple motion to invite the exhibition to a presentation monthly on the status of the Exolution project?
I think you could make a motion, and then if we have a seconder, then we would consider that motion.
Thank you. If we could just add that to the agenda, then that'd be appreciated. Thank you.
Okay. That's the
That'll be the second one. Sorry, it's in reverse order. The second one.
okay.
This is consent.
Okay, so the first one is consent agenda. So be it resolved that the minutes of the Economic Standing Policy Committee held on Wednesday, February the 10th be approved, and the mayor and the city clerk be authorized to sign the same. That would normally be moved by the deputy mayor, who's not here. So we'll go to acting Mayor Hagan. Oh no, deputy mayor is here. I see Mr. Okay, so he, Deputy Mayor Miyashiro has moved that. Any discussion, objections? All in favor? I'll call that unanimous. Okay. Now we'll move to adoption of the agenda by the acting mayor, that the agenda of the Economic Standing Policy Committee meeting as amended, taking into account the additional resolution request by Councillor Kaufman. So as amended, on February the 24th, 21, be adopted. Acting Mayor Hagan.
Question.
Question's been called. All in favor? Any opposed? That is carried unanimously. Thank you. Okay, we'll now go to presentations. And I'll invite Mr. Stuart Purkis, Electric Utility Manager, to lead the presentation.
Thank you very much, Mayor Spearman, and all of the members of the Economic Standing Policy Committee. Thanks for the introduction. I am Stu Purkis, and for most of you, I think I've been in a presentation with you previously, but I am the Business Unit Manager for the Electric Utility. I'd like to start today by thanking all of the staff of the Electric Utility who provided input to this plan. In particular, I want to call out the folks in our accounting group for pulling together all the information, as well as the numbers together for all of our programs, so I can be here today to provide you with a meaningful package and presentation for your consideration. I'll start by saying that our 2022 to 2031 CIP is very similar to the one that we presented to you for 2018 to 2027, both in function and as well in monetary requirements. Much of our capital funding is in place to ensure that electrical services are provided in a timely and efficient manner when the community growth occurs. As community growth goes, so does our spending. Having said that, if the community growth slows, so does our spending. We also have capital funding in place to ensure that end-of-life assets are renewed to provide the reliability and capacity that are required by our customers. Assessment of aging assets through periodic field patrols are then prioritized for replacement based on potential impact to our system's reliability. This is a long-standing methodology which has kept the electric utility at the ready for residents over 100 years, including the winds of 2 weeks ago. I will attempt to keep this presentation both high level and brief to ensure that there's time for any particular questions that you have. Janessa, next slide, please. I'm not seeing slides. Should I be?
I'll get Joel to put them up.
They're appearing on the screen here in
Okay.
council chambers. The first one says electric utility staff.
Yep, that's the one I'm on now. Good. So I'll go on that then. Thank you.
If you can say next as you go from slide to slide, then we can move the pages along in the presentation so the viewing audience can see them. Yeah.
The viewing audience isn't getting that, Your Worship.
Would you like me to start?
Just
or do you
one
want to
moment.
resolve this?
We're just regrouping here to make sure that everybody's on the same page.
Sounds good. I'll wait then for your instruction to start.
Tell some jokes.
Well, did you hear about the last electric utility that had problems in Texas? Yeah, glad we're not them.
I think they need more wind turbines.
Or maybe some walls on their gas power plants might have helped too.
Stu, the stories coming out of Texas regarding the $16,000 and $20,000 electrical bills are quite fascinating as well, and really emphasize the impact of deregulation.
Mhm.
Yeah, I see their pool price was peaking at $9,000 a megawatt hour, which in Alberta it's capped at 1,000. The system shuts off at 1,000, so there is some talk of that moving upward to incent generation in this province again, but not yet. So good, I see it now. Are we good to go?
Interesting governance implications down there. Half the oversight board has resigned.
Oh yeah, and
Okay.
hiding it, sure.
I think we're ready to go.
Yep, and we're on the correct page there,
Okay,
so I'll
thank
feed back in.
Please proceed. Thank you.
Thanks. So I thought it would be helpful to start today with the electric utilities why. Our staff is a dedicated group of people who take great pride in energizing for life. That means making sure that all of Lethbridge residences, commercial ventures, industries, and institutions have access to a reliable supply of electricity. Whether we're constructing something new or getting the lights back on after an outage, our department's core purpose statement is energizing for life. Next slide, please. So what are the assets that we install and operate on behalf of our customers? This slide is intended to provide you with an understanding of the core services provided by the electric utility to our customers and the relative value of those assets as of year-end 2019. The electric utility supports 3 core functions within the City of Lethbridge: distribution, transmission, and dark fiber services. All 3 of these functions are separately accounted for as independent utilities within the electric utility family, I'll say. Let's start with a brief description of the assets within each of these functions to provide you with some background context. Next slide, please. The distribution system refers to the medium voltage, electrical infrastructure that connects customers throughout the city into the supply of electricity from the transmission system, which is provincially regulated. Medium voltage in this context refers to assets that operate at 13,800 volts. The distribution system is built both overhead and underground and can be found tucked into the side of every roadway and alleyway throughout Lethbridge. A very large number of fairly small assets add up to a plant value of $222 million. Next slide, please. Transmission refers to the higher voltage electrical infrastructure, transmission lines, and electrical substations that are owned by the City of Lethbridge and form a part of the overall provincial transmission system. The transmission lines are operated at 138,000 volts, and the substations provide the interface to the distribution system by controlling and reducing the voltage to 13,800 volts. The transmission system is built overhead due to the cost and operating complexities associated with undergrounding these high voltage facilities. Transmission lines and substations are typically located on or adjacent to major roadways around the outside of the city. A relatively few number of large-sized assets add up to a plant value of $73 million. Next slide, please. Dark fiber refers to the fiber optic cable systems that have been strategically placed between various buildings in the city to provide a path for high speed, or also referred to as broadband communications, for a number of entities within the City of Lethbridge. The term dark is used to indicate that it is up to each customer to provide the electronic devices that then light the fiber to enable the communications functionality. The electric utility is a customer of this system. Dark fibers connect remote substations to our central coordination center. Other City of Lethbridge customers include the water and wastewater utility, the waste and recycling utility, and corporate IT, who provide data services for facilities that are remote to City Hall, like PSCC, fire and police facilities, libraries, the Galt Museum, CASA, and other facilities that require broadband functionality. In addition, other nonprofit entities in the community, like the University of Lethbridge, Lethbridge College, and Alberta Health Services, have joined as customers of this system to ensure reliable broadband connectivity for their organizations. The dark fiber assets have a total value of $4.5 million within the system. Next slide, please. Finally, we have our support plant assets, which refer to those assets that are allocated out to distribution, transmission, and fiber because they are shared by all three functional areas. Examples of support plant assets include our coordination center, storage buildings, construction laydown yards, fleet vehicles, and major tools, along with office furnishings for the utility. The total value of our support plant assets is $10 million. So that concludes my high-level overview for you now, and I'd like to describe a few of the key details about our program sheets that are associated with the 22 to 31 CIP. But before I begin that, maybe I should just pause for a minute to just see if anyone's hand might go up about any further clarification at a high level of what assets we're referring to today.
Are there any questions from council to this point? We see none.
Okay.
Councillor Campbell just put his hand up.
I'm not sure if this is the time to ask about it, but I was curious if you had, what is the future of dark fiber in the city, looking down the road?
Bright. So the dark fiber system that was, I'll say, invested in by the electric utility back in the 90s, simply to bring our own signals back to a common center, has now been leveraged by those other organizations. But we will be talking in coming weeks about the grant funding that was approved by the federal government under the ICIP grant application for a pilot of building out broadband functionality now more broadly to the industrial parks in North Lethbridge. And that system would tie back into this dark fiber system to transport information back to City Hall, where the main data switches exist to bring information to the larger internet. So there's a lot of future here for both systems.
Thank you.
Okay, if we can proceed.
Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so a little bit further general background around regulatory requirements here for you. So the transmission infrastructure within the city of Lethbridge and the province of Alberta both went through rapid growth from 2007 to 17. In the 18 to 27 CIP, growth was no longer the issue that we were dealing with. However, growth was replaced by the work that we now require to do to update infrastructure that had been installed in the 1980s. The 2022 to 31 CIP, there is a continued focus on the renewal of those end-of-life assets installed in the 80s. And this is to ensure a long-term reliable supply from that transmission infrastructure into the distribution system itself. It's important for the Economic Committee to remember that projects taken on within the transmission system are formally approved by the Alberta Utilities Commission. The City of Lethbridge CIP provides funding to complete projects that are approved through that AUC process. Once a project is approved and completed, the AUC will approve payments to the electric utility to fund these projects, including a fair regulated rate of return for that investment. So I'd now like to run you through just the CIP programs in section F that I think you have in your package there too. So we'll go next slide, please. And we'll start at F4, our protection and control accounts. So protection and control infrastructure represents the digital technologies which are responsible for watching over the electrical system on both the transmission and distribution systems 24/7, 365 days of the year. These devices are located within indoor climate-controlled buildings at each substation site. Protection and control infrastructure is responsible to send signals and isolate electrical infrastructure that's not operating within defined limits. This digital infrastructure has a typical life expectancy of between 10 and 15 years, which has been attained for the assets that we've listed in the CIP sheets for replacement during this CIP cycle. There's a question. Maybe two.
Councillor Croson?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the information. As you're on this protection and control, again, maybe it's because of what's been happening around the world. The one question I would have is, can this thing be hacked?
So there are very, very strict standards that have been developed by NERC, the North American Electric Reliability Council, that are then administered through the Alberta Electric System Operator, which include extensive work required to satisfy what are called CIP, critical infrastructure protection requirements. Much of that is focused around data security and cybersecurity. So yes, everything is audited through those Alberta reliability standards. These devices that you're seeing on the screen itself, they are really hardened computers to live within the substation environment. However, the need to network connect their information back to central coordination centers continues to grow, and therefore the need for that heightened security is there, and it is in place.
Okay. And that would all be taken care of with this capital project. All of that stuff that needs to keep it safe would be done all at one time?
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Kaufman?
Thank you, Mayor Spearman. Thanks, too. On this, first question, do we have P&C in place right now, or is this new? Is this something that we are introducing?
Nope, this is actually the first step of commissioning a new site, is to make sure the protection and control infrastructure is there and ready to trip something offline to keep the public infrastructure safe. So it's there, and we're just replacing, this is round 2 since I arrived here 20 years ago.
Okay, so we currently have P&C in place in all of the areas where we need it. This is the upgrade, okay?
Correct. Yep.
When it says this ensures that damage to the electrical infrastructure, can you just give me an idea of what sort of damage we're preventing here?
Well, if you go onto YouTube, there's some very good examples, which are quite frightening to watch. Major power transformers explode. You've got, literally thousands of liters of mineral oil that go up in a matter of milliseconds. So you're detecting electrical faults and making sure that they're disconnected from the power system as quickly as possible on initiation of fault.
So is P&C a post-event strategy, or is it pre-event? Is this equipment, is this technology identify something's about to happen, or is this something happened, we need to do this? It's the immediate millisecond process.
Yes. So I'm being funny, but yes, it's constantly monitoring, and it has a preloaded logical program along with settings for thresholds that when those thresholds are exceeded, immediately circuit breakers start to open on the system.
Okay, so it's more than just that fancy little $15 thing I got at Canadian Tire that tells me when my water heater is leaking.
We're
talking something that's actually could tell your water heater is going to leak, and the moment it starts, it shuts everything down.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Mr. Spearman.
Okay. Thank you. Next slide, please. So the next account we have is F5, our major substation transformer upgrades. So this represents the renewals of the devices responsible for reducing and regulating the supplied voltage from the transmission system to the distribution system. These large-sized, both dollar and sized assets are renewed on a 40-year cycle, and they have to be planned to meet the foreseeable load growth in the area throughout that time. All the transformers being replaced during this CIP have reached that 40-year point. And actually during this CIP, we will have wound up the renewal of all of the major transformers in the city of Lethbridge. And it'll probably be another 10 years before you'll see another major transformer upgrade required as they age in the ground. Next slide, please. Next account is F6, or our yards and buildings upgrade. So in yards and buildings provide the secure operating environment for electrical equipment and the protection and control infrastructure that we've just spoken about. Keeping energized infrastructure protected from the public and weather is keeping them protected from our stuff, as well as keeping the weather under control within those areas is a key driver for defining the upgrades in this area. Yards have to be built to ensure access under all weather conditions, as outage response by technicians is regularly done during or immediately after storms. Next slide, please. So the next one is F7, which is substation circuit breaker and switch upgrades. So substation circuit breakers are responsible for the interruption of those electrical flows on the 138,000 volt system as a result of the protection and control system seeing something off normal. These light switches, essentially, of the transmission system have a typical life expectancy of 40 years, which has been reached where we are going active with this CIP. The substation you see in the graphic is 111S Coal Banks. It's a substation that's located in the river valley on the site where the original generators that brought electric light to the city of Lethbridge 100 years ago were located. This site was rebuilt in 2002. However, the soil stability in the area has led to differential settlement within the assets in the outdoor yard that you see. This situation has been closely monitored for the last 10 years, but it's now necessary to step in with a fairly major renovation to ensure that the outdoor infrastructure is reliable for the long term. So new foundations, support steel, and electrical infrastructure will eliminate the operational issues created by the differential settlement. And again, this project forms a fairly major part of our application to the AUC to be approved before we proceed with those changes. Next slide, please. Actually, that concluded my short section on transmission, so I guess maybe we should just pause briefly again if there were any questions generated by those sheets.
I have a quick one. Your last one, F7, the substation, I believe you said it was in the River Valley?
Correct.
How is that protected in case we have another 1 in 100-year flood like we did in 1995?
1995 actually drove this site to where it exists today. It used to be about 3 meters lower in elevation. Again, not a stone's throw away from this yard. The events of 95 actually led to this project, which pushed this site up to be out of that 100-year floodplain. So it is, I guess, statistically protected that way. Unfortunately, the soils in and around that area, due to past industrial activity in the area, the old powerhouse foundations are still under there somewhere, has led to this issue that we now have to readdress the civil engineering issues underneath that electrical equipment to make it stable over time.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions on this section?
Just to, if I can, Mayor Spearman, just to follow up on your question then, Mr. Burkus, then, given that we have 1 in 100-year floods every 20 years, it seems, if that site is inundated by water, we have a system in place that has enough redundancy, we can still continue to provide electricity to the city?
That's correct. So the distribution system is a meshed or kind of multi-path type of network where our coordination center can tie back, say, the downtown area and the lower end, upper part of North and South Lethbridge that are serviced by that site can be serviced from other stations. There may be moderate restrictions on the amount of power we can provide under that emergency scenario, but that's only diligent from an economic perspective. We can't back up everything for every scenario.
Okay, thank you. So tied into this then, if we're looking at spending, how much was that? 4.3, 3.1, 4.2, somewhere in there.
Can we go back one, Janessa?
Sorry, Janessa. 4.5?
Too far. 4.5 total, Jeff? Yes.
I think it said 4.5.
Yeah.
If we're looking at that and we wouldn't be fully, as you say, it's not a complete, but we can mesh the system okay. I'm assuming insurance will cover it once. Is there the potential or necessity of looking at an alternate location for that?
No, I don't believe so. I think there may be a future opportunity well beyond our lifetimes that substation could move to top of bank and get out of there. The cost to reconnect the distribution system in another location are significant, but if planned over the next 30 to 50 years, that would be a wise maneuver, and that does sit in our long-term plan to look for opportunities to prepare for that movement out of the River Valley. As I said, it was the site 110 years ago when a clever entrepreneur said, let's put one there. And that's actually the legacy of why it's there still today.
Okay. All right, perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Thank you.
Good. So next slide, please, Jessica. So I'll move on now to the distribution system, which is where we do all need to pay tighter attention, because this is really where our regulatory authority and our true planning starts to impact and have meaning to our customers here in Lethbridge. So the first account is our most major one, and it's to cover extension and improvements in the electric distribution system. So again, I want to stress that distribution spending is driven by development within the community. If the community isn't growing or changing, we don't spend capital in this area. The Distribution and Extension and Improvement Annual Program is in place to fund distribution projects with the need to connect customers in areas that do not have access to the distribution system, which would be deemed an extension, or it funds projects where within the existing distribution system, the customer-driven change requires work or an improvement. And I'll go through a couple of examples so that's for your understanding. Next slide, please, Janessa. So an improvement may include something like, in the industrial park in the last year, we've done extensive upgrades with Hostess Frito-Lay to change the way fundamentally they take power into the plant to support their future growth. That would be deemed an improvement and funded from that CIP account. Next slide, please. When major transportation projects like this one on University Drive are initiated, it represents a key opportunity to get electric infrastructure into improved alignments for the long-term service of customers in the community. Coordination of our work with transportation adds efficiencies in the long term and avoids the issues associated with multiple excavations in a transportation right-of-way that can create serious inconvenience for citizens when we start multiple digging. So again, this is an improvement that's funded from that type of, from this CIP account. Next slide, please. In our last CIP, a major amount of extension work was done in the Shearing Industrial Park area to support the additional load of the new Cavendish Farms processing plant. This also laid the base infrastructure to supply future major loads in Shearing. It will be important to attract and retain new electrical loads into the industrial park to continue to leverage that installed infrastructure into new revenue for the electric utility. Although it's challenging to imagine another new extension to the distribution system like that was required for Cavendish, we didn't even know that Cavendish was going ahead when the last CIP was established. Therefore, it's critical to have the funding in place to allow efficient establishment of these extension services. Again, the capital is only spent if the community development occurs. Next slide, please. The final major aspect that extension and improvement funds is into new residential developments. During the original installation of a subdivision, a developer pays for the placement of the electrical distribution system. When the customers call for service connections to their lot, the electric utility then rebates the developer for the infrastructure costs and takes ownership of the asset associated with that service. This is to ensure that services are operated, maintained, and renewed for customers over the long term by the electric utility. Development has slowed recently. However, we need to maintain our access to extension capital in this area to ensure that funds are in place to rebate developers as lots developed in the past are now built on and turned over to our new customers. So now I'd like to move on to the topic of renewal projects in the distribution system. So if we can run to the next slide, Janessa. So F9 represents our account for distribution renewal annual program, and it's designed to fund the upgrading of existing infrastructure that has come to the end of life. In the last CIP, we were very active in renewing the three-phase mainline overhead infrastructure in both North and South Lethbridge. This picture shows a renewed alley. We anticipate the significant completion of this work throughout the city of Lethbridge by the end of 2025. Next slide, please. During this CIP, we need to also begin working on the single-phase overhead distribution system, which can be commonly found in the older alleyways in both North and South Lethbridge. This system is nearing the end of life from a structural and electrical perspective. Most of the plant has reached 40 to 50 years in age and needs to be prepared for the demands of the next generation of users. Pole replacements will provide the long-term structural requirements, and with anticipated increase in electrical usage associated with the electrification of vehicles, the wire capacity will need to be upgraded during this system renewal to meet those needs as they very rapidly now will start to appear. So that's kind of the end of my brief notes on those CIP sheets. So I think we should again just maybe pause and see if there's any questions before we move on.
Thank you. In relation to your last slide and comment about electrification of vehicles,
Yep.
seeing major producers like GM say by 2035, they will be converting their vehicle production to electric vehicles. What's the anticipated demand? How do you forecast for what might be happening in terms of electric vehicles and the demand that will impose on our system going forward?
That's a really good question that if we had a truly defined answer, I think we could start a consultancy that would take over the world. This is probably the number one concern of most distribution utilities across the world at the moment as to how this will play out. And maybe as importantly, when will it actually play out? When will the cars have a significant enough volume to start creating issues? I think what we need to remember is that this whole story played out, I got to date myself here, about 50 years ago, when our family stopped putting laundry out on lines and started throwing them into General Electric clothes dryers. And we would have taken the demand on the electrical system that had only carried lighting, and now we were doing significant things with it, like drying clothes. Somehow that system, which is what we're now replacing, really, did the job. And I'm sure there was a lot of fear at that time as dryers very quickly took over that responsibility. There are a lot of innovative topics and ideas being discussed about how to lessen the burden on the distribution system as the technologies get brought in, and we're tracking that very closely. I think the lesson is that we need to do due diligence to these systems that have reached end of life and not take the pedal off the gas here to ensure that we keep a good focused amount of renovation going on without overdoing it. If you remember back a few years ago, we may have jumped the gun a bit on underground cable replacement, and the impact of that on rates, if you get going with your renovation too quickly and at too high a level, means definite rate impacts for our ratepayers. So we want to be cautious, but we don't want to stop the renovation because we know what's coming.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Kaufman, did you have a question?
Yeah, I did. Thanks, Mayor Spearman. It taps on yours as well. Stu, something that we haven't seen is any sort of plan. I don't know if this is one of these weird ones that ends up in operating as opposed to capital, but on that line, I know we've had conversations before about, and I'm not going to use the right terminology here, is it the little neighborhood transformers that have 13 kilovolts or some number that you add two electric vehicles, and with all of these other energy demands we have going and whatnot, it's pushing that. Are we then planning for massive overhaul of that or replacement of all of that technology or infrastructure requirement?
So the short answer is it depends when those two people or 5 people, let's say, there's normally about 10 people attached to a small overhead distribution transformer, sometimes more, sometimes less. If that usage is timed, the system today can take it. But if everybody comes home at 4:30 and decides, hey, I'm going to plug my car in to make this happen, and I'm going to throw the dryer on because the kids got to get to their sports, and I'm going to throw the oven on to cook dinner, then there will be issues. And there are technological ways of limiting that use to each home if that's a stopgap while infrastructure gets upgraded. But there will be a very large need to educate the population and our customers, and it's not a new education. It's the old one of avoid the electricity rush hour. You can't come home at 4 o'clock to 7 o'clock and do everything all at once, and that will be especially true as we go through that step change to electrical cars.
Do we need to be putting resources or efforts into ongoing or another education program? Just because we're heading down this road now?
And the answer is yes, we are already doing that. We sit on a provincial board through Alberta Innovates looking at this issue, all distribution facility owners. So you have Fortis there, NMAX there, EPCOR there, ourselves there, working as a think tank about what are the best strategies to deploy technology-wise, upgrading infrastructure. And the answer will be a combination of those things as we continue to move forward.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mayor Spearman.
Thank you. Councillor Carlson.
Thanks, Mayor Spearman. Thanks, Mr. Perkis. Sorry, I can't get some of my things working. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Thank you for the presentation, all the information. Just following up, and maybe this isn't the right time, I think Councillor Kaufman mentioned tying into the operating budget, but not just education of our community, but is there a way to incentivize people to use electricity at better times, so to speak?
Yes, so commonly referred to as time of use rates are being looked at, and they're being looked at through even bodies like the Alberta Utilities Commission has just completed the distribution inquiry, they called it, looking at what would utilities have to do and spend in order to make those types of technologies or modernization of the grid a reality. So that inquiry just wrapped up. The report actually just got published on Monday, and many people will pore over that.
Okay, thank you. And further to that, because what we hear quite often is it's actually not the cost of electricity that's driving my bill. It's the cost of we all know, the distribution charges, tariffs, all those. And so is there a way, was that considered in this incentive, this time of use incentive?
Time of use would potentially change the amount of infrastructure that needs to be in the ground to make sure that people are satisfied with what they require. The fact is, though, is that wires fees, I think people often could compare it with insurance. Yep. Once you have that asset in the ground, it has to be supported then through rates, whether you flow just a little bit through it or you flow a lot through it. But some of that is tied back to the standards that are deployed, but the standards are deployed to meet maximum capacity going into each customer. So it is a very much a fine line, and we're at a very interesting juncture here where we have disruptive technology like cars coming that have significant requirements for electricity that we haven't seen a step change like that since the clothes dryer came.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. If there's no more questions, we can move on. Thank you.
Okay. So next slide, please, Janessa. Okay, so on to the dark fiber infrastructure. It was originally installed in the 1990s, and it's now ready to be upgraded to meet the needs of our customers connected to that system. Additional infrastructure to provide appropriate reliability into the West Lethbridge area and installing functionality to the airport are included in this CIP. In addition, the existing dark fiber system can be used to backhaul data from the Shearing and Churchill Park fiber to business broadband pilot project, which is currently in the planning stage to improve broadband connectivity for businesses in those areas. Next slide, please.
I think Mr. Hawkins had a comment on dark fiber. Mr. Hawkins?
Yeah, I just wanted to let council know that, or the economic SBC know that there will be a separate capital project brought forward in the existing CIP. It's not reflected in F10, but it's amendment to reflect the fact that we have been successful in receiving an ICIP grant and are scoping out a project around almost $7 million in value that will proceed this year, but will require an amendment to the existing CIP. That project, along with a number of other ICIP projects, will be bundled and brought forward to council for approval in the next month or so. So I just wanted to make sure that that you understood that this is dealing with just sort of the current customer base and the current infrastructure that we have with some modest extensions, And then we have that separate wholesale business that we're standing up in Sharing and Churchill industrial parks on a pilot basis that'll come separately.
Okay, thank you very much for that clarification. Thank you. Okay, if we can proceed now, Mr. Purkis, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, our support plant renewal program provides for the functionality of our fleet, specialty tools, construction storage buildings, and office infrastructure. Our specialty fleet is what makes our business possible. Whether it's aerial live line work, pulling large cables through long lengths of underground ductwork, or responding to outages in the worst possible weather, our fleet is crucial to our operations and to our people that do that work. We have increased our spending marginally on fleet this CIP as a result of lessons learned over time. We were holding on to our technical cranes and bucket trucks for a few years too long, which has cost us a lot in operating infrastructure money to have those vehicles repaired. We had normally held on to those vehicles for upwards of 10 years, but we will be reducing that to 8 in order to lower our operating costs of keeping those specialized electric vehicles reliable during their final years of operation. And maybe I should clarify, these are not electrical vehicles today, and I think industry may be looking at that in the future too, but today these are our standard diesel type powered vehicles. Next slide. Oh, sorry, not next slide just yet. Also included in support plant are our specialized tools that are required by our power line technicians and power system electricians to perform their work. From live line tools that allow a power line technician to safely work on 13,800 volt systems, to fiber optic splicing equipment that's used by power system electricians to fuse communication strands the size of a hair filament. Our work is heavily dependent on the specialty tools being maintained and up to date. Next slide, please. Our Electric Control Center, or F12, is where all of our system operations are managed at the electric utility to ensure reliable supply of electricity to our customers. Remote monitoring of key assets, as well as some of their control, are done through our coordination center using an operational technology referred to as SCADA, or System Control and Data Acquisition. Upgrades to SCADA and the other IT technologies that assist our operators in doing their job, coordinating activities on the system, are typically required on a 5-year basis. Next slide, please. Now, this is where I think you really want to have the information, and that's to understand what are the rate impacts for the program that I've described here. I know you need to understand that impact, and we've done that work to bring that here today. First, I need to provide some background information, though, on the assumptions that go into the analysis and what parts of the customer bill we can manage, both council and the electric utility, given existing boundaries from a regulatory perspective. Janessa, can I have the first bullet? So first, let's remember that transmission spending is approved by the AUC, and we recover that investment through payments back from the ISO. All spending in transmission is regulated by those provincial entities and is not the regulatory responsibility of council. Next bullet, please. Also, let's remember that our distribution tariff, which you do approve, collects transmission access fees, which form a portion of the customer's overall wires bill. However, transmission access fees represent the flow-through cost that we receive from the ISO for connection of the distribution system to the provincial transmission system. City Council does not have regulatory responsibility for transmission access fees. Next bullet, please. So we have focused our review for you on where you have regulatory authority, and that is distribution spending, which is recovered through the distribution tariff in the form of distribution access fees. Next bullet. Our total revenue requirement for the distribution system then comes from our operating budget and the costs that are associated with this capital program. You have approved our 2022 operating budget, and our assumption for the analysis that we've done today is a 0% increase in the next operating budget for the next 4 years, 23 to 26. Next bullet. This approach will allow us to isolate the impact on distribution access fees that are created simply by this CIP as it's being presented to you today. Any question on those assumptions?
Councillor Kaufman?
Thank you, Mayor Spearman. I know that part of what Mr. Dalton is doing in terms of innovation within the organization is going to have an incredibly positive impact. Are you looking at innovative or different things within electrical that's going to support this? Maybe find some natural savings just through reassessing, reevaluating, reapproaching these things?
So one of the initiatives that we're currently working on with the Asset Management Office is to introduce more formal asset management processes as suggested by KPMG. So we have people working both internally here within Electric with Blair Richter of the Asset Management Group to ensure that we're coming up to speed. I believe that our long-held methods of assessing and knowing where to go are strong, and I think this exercise should validate that with being able to query into databases and see that. But we hope there is something there. We continuously look though for innovative technologies that can be brought, and one of those things is the conservation voltage reduction initiative that we piloted for the province and have now working with NRCan to cover the city with that smart grid system that should bring about 3 to 5% reduction in people's energy bills for the energy side. So that's very significant when you consider that it covers every customer. It's not that a few customers change a light bulb, it's every single customer benefits from that technology. So
okay, thank you, Mr.
Okay. All right, so
I do have a question as well.
Yep.
As the technologies for green energy improve, and we may have residential customers and maybe commercial and industrial customers who begin generating a portion of their own electricity. To what extent is that a consideration for your department? And is there an impact on rates? One, or if there's a significant growth going forward in self-generation, if I can use that term, how might that impact rates? And secondly, if people are producing electricity within the city of Lethbridge, say from solar panels, do we have rates which provide for the buyback of electricity from those generators?
So today there's a defined program which has existed for many years, I'm thinking at least 20, called the microgen regulation, which is a regulatory construct from the AUC that allows renewable sources that are less than 5 megawatts in size to be connected to a system, must be connected to a system, so it's my mandate to connect those things. And the proviso of that regulation is that all that energy is used on site on average over the year. So although you may spill some energy in some hours of the day, over the year, you can't be a net generator to the system. The next stage that is being, I'll say, philosophically put forward is more what are called distributed energy resources, where people may start hooking on devices to the system that physically push back into the electric utility as a generator. And in fact, today, you have to either be a generator or a load or a microgen, but you can't be a generator sometimes and a load at other times and try to game the market. The AUC has put a stop to that. And that will be part of all this distribution inquiry, is to try to sort out how is it that we fairly allow these technologies to move forward without adversely affecting other load customers and the rates that we all pay. So it is another, I'll say, leap point into the future for electric utilities, because for 100 years now, almost all the power just ran downhill from the transmission system into loads in the distribution system. but the future may look more like distributed generation sources being put in place. We don't have any of those in place today. As you would know, Black Velvet and a couple of others machines exist only for their own internal use and creating heat, typically in their facility as much as the energy. But we haven't seen widespread requests in that space. Certainly the microgen reg is being well used by residentials. We have, I think, over 150 now attached small solar rooftop type systems, right up to 170 kilowatt system on one industrial customer. But it's not widespread yet, but certainly our whole industry has to be ready for those changes, and that's what the AUC has done the distribution inquiry about.
So at this point, it's not a serious impact on the rate structures that you're providing within the city?
It's not, and we will have Shimco Consulting at our side to define rates in a proper way to make sure that we're allocating costs correctly when those first actual projects come.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, so just we'll go to the next slide then. There's one other very important variable that we've got to consider when we are trying to predict rate impacts in the electrical load growth in the community and its electrical load growth in the community. If customers use more energy, the electric utility collects additional revenue. The growth revenue is used to meet our overall revenue requirements. This graph shows how the peak demand for energy has grown in our community over the past 25 years. As you can see, growth can be lumpy, and that is a result of both economic conditions as well as weather extremes that can be experienced from year to year. However, when we look at the long term, it took 100 megawatts in 1995 to satisfy all customers at peak, and last year it took 180 megawatts to satisfy those customers at peak. That represents an annual compound growth rate of 2.5% in electrical use over that time frame. Next slide, please. And this one we've touched on already. There's going to be pressure on energy growth over the foreseeable future as the world looks to electrify vehicles. How much pressure, when, and where is yet to be clearly understood. This slide shows the options that currently exist. A fast charging station in the top left, where you get your car charged up from empty to full in less than a half an hour. We also show here on-street charging, as well as home charging in the bottom. 80% of current car charging takes place at people's homes. All of the modes of charging will drive up electrical usage and the requirements of the electric utility throughout our service area. Therefore, we believe it's very justifiable to assume that load growth will continue to rise over time. How much is what we will need to keep a close watch on. Next slide, please.
Could I ask a question there as well?
Yes.
How are we managing what might happen in terms of what I would call electricity retailers for these charging stations? So right now, I think the federal government has a program out which provides incentives for those who apply. And I know along Highway 3, a number of communities are participating in that federal program. I don't think the city of Lethbridge is currently contemplating participating in that program. Are we aware of any entities within the city of Lethbridge who might be?
Doug, I believe Darwin was involved there from transportation perspective.
Yeah, so the charging station, to the extent that we participated, it was with those charging stations behind the health unit, Mr. Merritt. That was part of that provincial program, and part of that sort of economic development incentive to create a corridor of fast chargers across the province, north, south, and east, west as well. There is some addition. I believe they're looking at another program, but at this particular point, we're not actively pursuing it as a participant at this particular point. We continue to keep our ears to the to the ground when it comes to these initiatives, but there's nothing actively being pursued beyond what was constructed behind the health unit.
And the city's not considering anything at prime visitor locations or the NMAX or anything for electrical charging stations at this time?
ATB Center was the most recent investment that we did actively include in the leisure center capital project. In terms of I don't believe, I'd have to check with facilities in terms of any opportunities to include charging infrastructure at other public facilities. So I'm not aware of anything actively being planned at this point. However, having said that, public operations and electric operations on the north side and along with transit, are contemplating some upgrades there as we try to migrate some of our fleet towards the electrification, EV electrical vehicles to replace some of our light duty fleet and those kinds of things. So there is some planning work underway, but nothing actively being constructed at this point.
Thank you. Councillor Carlson?
Thank you, Mayor Spearman. Thank you, Mr. Perkins, for this. I had a question that's kind of a philosophical question about moving forward. When you were talking about the north and south quadrants of the city needing significant upgrades because the infrastructure is many, many years old and may not handle the upcoming power requirements. Does anyone ever consider different approaches? I've been reading about battery storage, things like, I think it's the Tesla Powerwall, and I don't know how those operate. If it could be a slow trickle charge during the nighttime hours, and then the homes use that during the peak hours to take the weight off the system. And just, I've been trying to, I have no idea of the costs associated, but I'm thinking replacing an entire power grid or plant lines is cost X. What would the cost be of, say, oh, now we'll give the homeowners this battery pack that trickle charges during off-peak hours, and it might be a significant cost savings. But I have no idea. It might actually be 10 times the cost. I have no idea.
And that's a very fair assessment. And there is the start of those kind of activities in literature, but not really from a practical standpoint of this thing. The other thing that we would need to remember is that those technologies are aiming at cost, and they're homing themselves behind the meter, where an electric utility does not enter. Our jurisdiction and our capability must end at the meter, and then the customer and a different electrical code even deals with everything beyond that meter. There's nothing that I've read to date, though, that doesn't clearly state that the need for a reliable and robust grid for these technologies to interact in an interconnected way has never been more important than with the waxing about all these new technologies that are capable. Because if somebody has that, they may want to now sell power into the grid for an hour when it might be more expensive. What do they need? They need wires to interchange that energy with other customers. So there's nothing to date that I've seen that actually doesn't drive more requirement for wires rather than less.
Okay, thank you for that. Because in my mind, it just seemed like municipalities have sometimes, through their water utility, incentivized customers to upgrade their home because it's in turn a savings to the utility and a benefit to the environment, obviously. And I was just wondering if there were similar thoughts on the electric side, but maybe I'm 20 years too early.
I do believe you'll see swings in how rates are defined and charged as these disruptive technologies become more capable.
Okay. Thank you, Mayor Spearman.
Thank you. Councillor Kaufman.
Thank you, Mayor Spearman. Less philosophical, but less off paper and more in the real world. If you go back a slide, if you could move back a slide, please, Ms. Brown, that would be appreciated. When you're talking about peak, 2% annual growth, the law of proportionate growth would indicate that we're going to be doubling in 35 years, and that looks to be the trend that we're on, certainly. How does solar, to a lesser extent wind, we don't permit the turbines, but if we did, and to an even lesser extent geothermal, how does the addition of green technology, primarily solar, help us?
So that probably requires a PhD level person to come in and give like a very long-term view of that, Councillor Kaufman. But my own take on it is today, with the 150 facilities that are out there, you would not even, you'd barely see 1 megawatt of those 180 that are required. And
So
does that line up with the hot day when we hit that 180? The issue with renewables is they're not scheduled. You can't dispatch them. They're there or they aren't there. And so the battery will actually provide some ability to now schedule that energy in as it's required versus it just coming out as the sun or the wind are available. So I think there will be changes in that respect. But these systems, despite their costs coming down appreciably, create fairly significant technological challenges for their operators, the homeowner, who may not be up to that challenge. And so that, again, is where a strong grid available to make sure that people have a reliable source for power all the time is absolutely required.
So an aggressive move, thank you to that, thank you for that. So an aggressive move towards strong advocacy in solar panels or some form of green energy, by your approach and your statement, is not something that's going to have a huge impact on demand. Existing at the moment, as you say, 150 or something structures in the city, obviously not, but an aggressive program to try to encourage that or in support of that, you say is not going to really address the issues that we're looking to address.
I don't think so, especially when you consider the bulk need for power going up quite quickly if the car in 2035 is what GM, Ford, Volkswagen, etc. actually meet.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so this is my final slide, and so thanks for the questioning on the assumptions, because those assumptions strongly weigh into this final slide on analysis. So we've provided for you 2 different scenarios today to consider how our CIP can impact distribution access rates or distribution access fees as part of the distribution tariff. So in the first row of the table, we show you the impact of the CIP if a 2% increase in revenue is achieved as a result of customer load growth each year. Again, that's been pretty typical over the last 25 years. This will result in a 2% increase on the distribution access rates in 2022, and that would reduce all the way down to no increase required to support the CIP by 2026. The other scenario, though, that we wanted to bring forward was we wanted to show what are the rate impacts of this CIP should there be 0% increase in revenue as a result of load growth in the community. So if load growth does stagnate, the overall growth of the city will be very low. Therefore, the amount of our capital spending would drop as extension work would naturally slow. This would take the pressure off the rate increases that we show you in row number 2. I also want to remind you that each fall we come before City Council to discuss rates for the next year, and based upon the most up-to-date financial and use information that we have. When rates are set by Council each fall, we can and we do provide adjustments in both capital and operating spending in order to provide prudent rates for customers for the following year. This takes the assumption work out of multi-year forecasting and allows council to provide regulatory oversight with the best and most current data possible. So that concludes the materials that I had, but I'm assuming that chart may raise some questions for you too.
Councillor Kaufman? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, thank you. I don't have my hand up.
Okay. Okay. So if we were to summarize what these numbers mean, and looking at your overall presentation, there is a lot of investment in replacing redundant equipment or equipment that's coming to the end of its useful life.
Correct.
In order to maintain the reliability of the system going forward. And secondly, the 2% load growth, is that primarily through expansion of the customer base or through expansion of usage by existing customers?
So again, the answer to that is yes.
Okay.
But when you get a single load like a Cavendish processing plant coming on, that of course makes quite a jump in what our total customer base is using.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, there's no further questions, so the anticipated rate increase is 0 going forward for next year?
No, it would be 2%.
Okay.
If we see the 2% increase in revenue as a result of load growth, which is typical.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any further questions from council? Okay. So there are no further questions. I have a resolution here and I'm looking for a mover. It's for the 2022 to 2031 Capital Improvement Program Electric Utility. Be it resolved that the Economic Standing Policy Committee received the report and presentation as information. Who would like to move that?
I can move that.
Moved by Councillor Crowson. Any questions, any further questions? Final opportunity. Any debate? There are none. All in favor? Are any opposed? There are none. Thank you for your presentation. We do appreciate the information. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, it's 2:43. Can we move on to the next presentation at this time? Okay. Okay, the next presentation is from Economic Development Lethbridge. And we do have the Executive Director of Economic EDL here to present, and we would invite him to come and present. So, Trevor Lewington, welcome.
Thank you, Your Worship. To you and through you to the rest of the committee. I don't actually have a presentation for you today, just two information sheets, both of which were sent in your council package. The first of which is actually labeled Economic SPC Q1 Update. So it's a preview actually of our annual year in review document. We will be holding our annual general meeting on St. Patrick's Day. So if you're bored and lonely and would like something to do, you would be most welcome to join us on March the 17th at 4 p.m. where we'll be going through that in more detail in a more colorful version. But given today's meeting, we wanted to at least provide you with some information. And I appreciate the city manager giving us the opportunity to be invited today. So, looking back to 2020, it was actually a fairly good year from an economic development perspective, notwithstanding the curveballs provided to us by COVID and all of the related stress therein. And what I've included in this particular one-pager is just a number of metrics that we track from year to year to give you a bit of an idea of where things went and what the workload looked like. So the first one speaks to business retention and expansion. You can see there was a significant increase in the number of inquiries. I don't think that's a shock. That's a trend that's similar to the rest of the province. And we actually saw 2 expansions as a result of our work that resulted in 46 jobs and an economic impact of almost $13 million. A couple of things I'd like to say about those numbers. First and foremost, we only track ongoing permanent jobs. So a project that results in construction work, for example, is not something we track. We're only looking for the ongoing long-term impact. And in terms of the economic impact, those are direct numbers only. So council and members of the committee will likely be very familiar with the STEAM model that's used in sports and events that looks at both induced and indirect. We only track direct spend because it's the easiest to quantify, it's the most reliable. So the translation of that is that the numbers you see on this sheet are the most conservative and represent the smallest possible impact, and we know that there are greater impacts beyond that. From an investment attraction perspective, we had slightly less inquiries, 43 versus 60 in the prior year. Again, a trend that matches the rest of the province. Alberta saw a reduction in foreign direct investment by about 42% over the course of 2020. We had 6 landed businesses, resulting in 77 jobs and almost $66 million in direct economic impact. Again, we're quite pleased with those numbers, all things considered, when you look at the scale of the full year and some of the challenges that other parts of the province are seeing. Combined in the next section, section 3, where it shows the direct impact from a historical perspective, we do track this year to year, of course. And I guess what I would draw your attention to, first of all, is that there is an ebb and a flow. So not every year exceeds the prior year. There is always an up and down to this process. Economic development, we sometimes joke, is not only a full contact sport, but also the long game. But what you'll notice is over the last 5 years, for every $1 in municipal funding that we've received, we've delivered back an economic impact of $241. So again, we'd like to show you your return on investment for the dollars that you provide to us. And even last year being a somewhat challenging year, you can see that in 2020, the impact for every $1 city dollar provided to economic development Lethbridge, there was $104 in direct economic impact. Outside of the traditional business retention and expansion, as well as investment attraction roles, we of course operate Tech Connect, which is our incubator here in town. That's part of the RINSA network, so the Regional Innovation Network of Southern Alberta, supported by Alberta Innovates. And since inception in 2011, you can see that we've created 278 tech sector jobs in Lethbridge, and almost 54% of those are filled by post-secondary graduates. So one of the key reasons for that project, of course, one of the incentives or one of the inducements to create Tech Connect in the first place was to create new and incremental opportunities to retain new grads in our community. So we're quite pleased with that. And over the course of Tech Connect's existence so far, we have graduated 26 tech companies from the center. So we're quite pleased with that performance as well. You'll notice that in some cases, the year-over-year job trends, whether it be at Tech Connect, whether it be investment attraction, are declining. I think it's important to also note that traditionally economic development, jobs has been a key measure. It's more and more challenging in that space as technology continues to disrupt. So we are seeing more automation technologies. We are seeing people automate their workspaces. So, the traditional job count numbers, we will of course still track, and they're interesting, but I don't expect that those will be as useful moving forward as we see the impact of some of those technologies. And we've seen significant investments in expansions in Lethbridge, plants adding space, plants adding equipment, that result in great property tax assessment lift for the city in terms of construction and building values, but in fact may result in 0 net new jobs. So that's just something to be conscious of. And from a Tech Connect perspective, you'll see that there is fluctuations from year to year. One of the challenges that we have, and it's a good problem to have, is when a company is acquired, we can no longer track them. So if an incubator company graduates from our center and they're purchased by another company, they fall off of our metrics tracking. And all of our graduates sign an MOU with us that we're allowed to track them for up to 5 years post-graduation. But inevitably, there are some companies that are non-compliant with that request. And so those numbers, of course, are not included. These are not guesses. They're just the numbers that our clients do, in fact, disclose to us. Section number 5 is just a quick update to let you know what we're doing between our 2 major programs to support entrepreneurs, the first being RINSA that I've already talked about. And then we have a federally funded program with Western Diversification to support women entrepreneurs in science, technology, engineering, and math. And a couple of things that I would point out that, interesting, even though there were challenges last year, we did in fact deliver 10 prototypes. So the networks have supported 10 new innovations in that space, certainly below our annual target, but this is for the first 6 months. And just a slight note on the timing, because this is provincial and federal government funding, our year is actually April to March. So we're only talking about the first 6 months, April to September effectively in 2020. We, of course, shifted to primarily delivering our programming and events in an online way, but we were still able to support 226 coaching sessions with entrepreneurs, so there's an awful lot of support there. From a marketing and advocacy perspective, thrilled to let you know that the Economic Development Lethbridge team has won 4 actual awards. So we were recognized with 2 international design awards for our work on the Team Lethbridge materials that were used on the last mission to Edmonton. So we achieved a gold award in the Hermes International Design Competition and a silver at the Summit International Design Awards. So quite pleased with those, seeing that international recognition. We were also recognized by the Golden Shovel Agency as having one of the best economic development sites globally. And in fact, on their top 5, we are the only Canadian entity to be recognized by the Golden Shovel Agency. And lastly, just this week, Economic Developers of Canada announced that our work with the Canada's Premier Food Corridor, which is a coalition of 5 municipalities along Highway 3, has been recognized with an award of excellence for the website and the collateral that was created there. Catalytic projects, of course, this committee will know that there's been an awful lot of provincial stimulus money that's been injected into some very significant and important projects in this region. And of course, as council, you have all supported those projects, for which we're grateful. So we continue to work on our advocacy efforts with the various ministries, both at the administrative and political levels where appropriate, to support those projects as well as new projects as they arise. An example, sometimes on the policy side, would be that the Minister of Labour and Immigration, Minister Copping, holds a roundtable with HR executives once a month. We've been fortunate to participate in that, and we've been able to effect some changes, for example, on the temporary foreign worker program, which is of significant interest to both our primary ag producers and our ag processors in this region. So of course, if we can help effect some of those policy changes, we will continue to participate in those venues. And then the last point on this particular report relates to your leverage funding. So council will recall when it approved our 4-year business plan, we set a target of 55 cents in leverage funding. So for every $1 in municipal funding, we had an objective or a goal to go and find an additional 55 cents. Pleased to let you know that we've actually exceeded that target quite significantly. This is a tentative number. We are just going through the final stages of our audit. We'll have our final numbers for our AGM next month. But in 2020, for each $1 of municipal funding, we were able to secure an additional $1.37 from other levels of government through projects and through our corporate partners. So again, a pretty significant source of funding that supports our operations and reduces the burden on the city. And you'll recall from the KPMG report that at about 41% is what the city's contribution makes up of our overall budget, and that's one of the most competitive and lowest ratios in Western Canada. The second report is sort of the look forward. So it's a 1-page snapshot. It's not very pretty, but it's, I think, fairly functional to give you a picture at a glance of our 6 primary strategies, our 6 pillars of our business plan, if you will. Again, none of those will be a surprise. When you were sitting as council, you approved that for your business plan, and each of the priorities, the 3 priorities within each sector. So those are the colored boxes. What this 1-pager does, I think, is provide you with some of the key measures that we look to in terms of measuring our progress. It also shows you some of the key partners, and I'll apologize in advance for the alphabet soup of acronyms that's there. That's just a function of trying to shove it all into 1 page. But some of our key partners are clearly delineated in that section, so you know who we're talking about when we're working with partners. And perhaps the most significant portion of that sheet for your reference is some of the key work plans. It's not everything, but under each pillar, we've outlined some of the key activities, programming areas, or focuses. And there's a bit of a color code there. Green is essentially something that's on track or in progress. Yellow, or orange in this case, so it shows up, would be something where there's been maybe a delay or there's a bit of concern, but it's still moving forward. And then there are a number of ones that are red that are either waiting on an external stakeholder or could be a barrier that's outside of our immediate control. Again, I don't think any of those will be a surprise to you. I appear before you either as a committee or as council several times per year and provide you updates on things like the work of the Economic Recovery Task Force, or when Bill 7 was introduced, the areas where I think municipal policy can have an influence on the work that we do in terms of making Lethbridge more attractive for investment. So I won't repeat any of those presentations. I will simply leave it there and certainly entertain any questions.
Okay, thank you for your presentation and the quick way you presented a lot of information. Questions, Councillor Campbell?
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Trevor, for the information and the report. As always, highly entertaining. And congratulations on all the awards that you've received as well. It's great. I just wonder, and I don't know how much you would keep track of, you know, as I drive through the city, you know, in the middle of COVID, and I see all of the restaurants that have, you know, are dealing with all of it. Do you keep any information as to how the restaurant business is surviving in the city? And, you know, and I know a number of restaurants just started to open up and you've attracted them to the city. Do you have anything on that or any report on helping them or getting them going or anything?
Yeah, thanks for the question. There are two metrics that we look at, of course, the pace of new business licenses in the city, which has decelerated somewhat. So that's the first measure, which is a bit of a leading indicator. And a lagging indicator would be somewhat corporate and business bankruptcies. The challenge with measures like bankruptcy is it normally takes 6 to 8 months for a business bankruptcy to be processed and hit the official records. So if there is to be a wave, we've not seen that impact yet. It's going to take some time to do that. Beyond that, as restaurants specifically, we do meet with restaurateurs quite frequently. We're meeting with a group actually on Monday of next week to talk about some of the challenges they faced in the reopening, talk about some of the policy challenges they have, and where we can perhaps lend a voice or lend a hand to elevate some of their concerns or find an alternative solution. And part of our role, of course, is to connect all businesses, restaurants in particular at the moment, with some of the provincial supports that have been deployed to make that available. So yeah, multifunctional role there.
And I know that that sort of changes almost on a weekly basis. The what they can provide from the government, is that still ongoing?
Yeah, it's certainly been an interesting ride this year in 2020 to understand all the different changes in the programs. I think the good news is that both provincial and federal governments have been willing to take feedback and make changes. So we have seen, for example, a rent subsidy program rolled out by the federal government in the first wave. There was not a lot of uptake. There were some barriers to how people could access the program. The second iteration has been much better. Likewise, you know, provincial relaunch grants, the first couple of waves had some challenges, particularly for businesses that were not able to provide data. Perhaps they'd opened during the pandemic. That was identified as a gap, and subsequently the government made provisions to update and modify their program. So it has been challenging in that, you know, much as the wind direction and volume changes daily or hourly here in Lethbridge, sometimes government supports some programs in response to the ebbs and flows of this pandemic change on a similar frequency. So that's part of the work, is to keep in touch and keep up and make sure we get the most current and most accurate information in the hands of entrepreneurs and businesses.
Thank you.
Councillor Carlson?
Thank you, Mayor Spearman. Thank you, Mr. Lewington. Nice to see the top part of your face again. Here, in honor of Pink Shirt Day, I thought you would appreciate my new look. There you are.
That's a great looking filter. Well done.
Thanks, Trevor. Trevor, just a question. Through the pandemic, we've spent a lot of time and had a lot of focus on our private sector for-profit folks, and we know they're struggling. But what I'm hearing recently is that the not-for-profit sector, which is still a fairly big part of our economy and the services they provide to our community, is also really struggling. They've been sort of buoyed up by some government, other order of government grants, etc. But they're all getting very concerned about 2021 and 2022, if they'll be able to survive. Does your organization have any thoughts on that, or any contacts or information for that sector that I'm starting to hear great warning signs about?
Thank you for the question. We are working with a number of organizations in the not-for-profit center. There's a group that's loosely coalescing around this social innovation center to support each other better. So, for example, sharing of resources, sharing of governance practices to shore up the individual organizations. So I think we can continue to support organizations directly with that. My understanding, early indications are that tomorrow's provincial budget will include some new programs specifically for the not-for-profit sector. So those concerns that you mentioned have been heard, and there are plans to try and address them as best as possible, at least at the provincial level. We've also heard, again, no details at this point, that there are some federal programs that will be adjusted to accommodate the not-for-profit sector. So I'm at least cautiously optimistic that governments continue to listen and continue to make changes when required. But I do think that's an important consideration for this committee is, as you hear that feedback, make sure that we are rolling up themes and concerns, that we are advocating as strongly for the not-for-profit and arguably the public sector as well. I include our post-secondaries and our healthcare sector, who have differing needs that are coming out of the pandemic, but also very key components of Lethbridge's economy.
Agreed. Thank you very much. I appreciate that you're on top of that. And thanks for the information. Thank you, Mayor Spearman.
Thank you. Are there any further questions for Mr. Lewington? I see none at this time. I'd like to thank you for your presentation, and we look forward to working with you in the future. So thank you. And we now have a resolution moved by Deputy Mayor Miyashiro. He's not here. Okay, Councillor Campbell was asking questions. So moved by Councillor Campbell, Economic Development Lethbridge Quarterly Update. Be it resolved that the Economic Standing Policy Committee received the report as information. Councillor Campbell.
Call the question.
Question's been called. All in favor? Any opposed? There are none. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Lewington. Okay, we'll now move on to 4.3. That will be Lethbridge Land Quarter Q4 2020 Activity Report. I'll invite Mr. Kelly forward to present. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship, members of the committee. Just a little history. So Lethbridge Land has been doing annual reporting and submitting to City Council as information. And we also follow that up with our work plan and expenditures, which goes to City Council as well for approval. And most recently, we did an update of that work plan and expenditures because of the economic conditions for this past year, and made some adjustments which City Council took in and approved as well. And building on that and providing information to this committee and then for the council, we thought instead of just doing annual reports, we'd try to do quarterly reports. And I would appreciate if there's any feedback or any gaps of any other things that the committee would like to see in the report. We're all ears, especially because this is the initial report for you. So if I can start with the highlights from the last quarter four of 2020. One of our biggest things that we did as a department was the grand opening of the Crossings playground, which Mayor Spearman was cordial enough to come out and cut the ribbon for. It was a very different opening because of the COVID. We had just some media people and a few staff for the celebration, but if you've been out there when the weather's nice, it is a very busy park. It's very well utilized already, even though it seems to be at the edge of the universe on the north end of the Crossings development. The next one is about the incentive policies. So we were working with the Economic Recovery Committee, reported back and forth numerous times. City Council did approve the 6 policies. A number of the policies were already existing, with one new, which was the industrial municipal tax incentive. What our investigations found and what City Council approved was the ability to reduce the red tape that was associated with each one of the policies, and hopes that we can get these funds out quicker into the community and spur some economic activities. I'd like to report to City Council, we've been contacted, and it shows up in our inquiries down below, by five different municipalities around Alberta, which are Airdrie, Okotoks, Grand Prairie, Fort McMurray, Medicine Hat, asking and wanting further background information about these policies. So I would say that City Council has moved ahead in a very positive way about those policies, and hopefully we'll see some uptake on them and be able to report back to you, which when City Council did approve those policies, they made a request that administration report back in June to an activity report of the various policies, which we intend to fulfill. Next was the deliberation and final approval with City Council about the municipal stimulus funding that was provincial, that the City Council approved 2 projects at the airport, in the electrical ground lighting and the taxiways, aprons, runways, and Festival Square. Those have been approved by the province, and subsequently City Council has approved the amended CIP sheets. Moving into the red tape reduction, and why this is on here, as part of the municipal stimulus funding, there's a requirement for municipalities to report annually about red tape reduction for in February 2021 and February of 2022. So city manager has instructed me, or gave me direction, to work with the Chamber, Build, Economic Development Lethbridge, and the Construction Association about the red tape reduction and the criteria that the province put forward, which are about making it easier to start a new business, streamlining processes and shorten timelines for development and permit approvals, and steps to make our municipality more attractive as a destination for investment in tourism. With the group, I'll call them the red tape group, which was the agencies that I mentioned prior, we've had a couple of meetings to date, brainstorming, putting out ideas that we'll put more effort into further investigating the opportunities for red tape reduction, and they are very excited about it, and I do know that Build and the Lethbridge Construction Association had already put reports together in the Q4, 3 and 4 of last year, directly to the province for their ideas of red tape reduction as it pertains to the province. We did, and we have submitted the report, which was in Q1 of this year, to the province, which I will summarize our next quarterly report. As far as concierge service, and concierge service to us means working with potential investors, which can be non-for-profit or for-profit agencies or groups that might include site selection, helping them through the development and building permit process. Sometimes, because particularly in a nonprofits situation, this might be a once-in-a-career opportunity that happens, so they're not as well versed in our development and building permitting processes. So often, as I jokingly say, we are often translating Greek to Hebrew on occasion, but we're trying to help them be successful and see their projects through. So what to date, at the end of Q4, we were working with 7 different potential affordable and social housing projects, 2 potential industrial investments, and the major investment at Exhibition Park, which the province and the city has both approved funding for. The next part of my report just demonstrates the number of inquiries that we've had. And this does not reflect the number of phone calls or emails or posts or tweets or ABCs or do-re-mis that we get. These are trying to, this is identifying what are true inquiries that might turn into leads or potential sales or leases for us. The other category, which I note at the bottom there, what they're inquiring about is there's about incentives or opportunities that are available within the city that an investor could tap into. And on occasion, there's been inquiries not of city-owned properties, but properties that are held by other developers that there might be an opportunity for. So we don't dismiss that and just turn them away. We'll actually get them in touch with that developer, and hopefully something will come of that. Sales in October, we've split it out by industrial and residential. We have pending sales just from month to month. That's the same pending sale. That's not a new pending sale, just to get some clarification. And on the residential side, as you look in the crossings in Riverstone, we have a number of options that are in hand right now, and moving forward to close on them early in this new year. So with that, I was looking today, not just to give the committee an update, but looking to get feedback from the committee if there's other things that they'd like to see on a quarterly report from our operation that would be of value to them.
Good. Is that the end of your presentation, Mr. Kelly? Okay, thank you. I do have a question. Once we sell a property, let's say from the city's land base, whether it's industrial or any other form, would it be possible to get updates on what the development status of that project is? So if we sold industrial land a year ago, today, what is the status of that project, for example?
Yes,
has it moved forward, or I think, and we might need it by type. For example, we've invested in the airport. So one of the things we'd be looking at as a city is how is that investment proceeding in terms of possible land sales and developments going forward, and how is that assisting as a catalytic project? How's that assisting our economy? So.
Yes. One question back, if you don't mind, Mayor. Would that be limited? I don't suppose you'd want to know about all the residential lots. You're more interested in the non-residential side. Is that correct?
I think both. I think all of it.
Okay.
All of it affects our economy, and but certainly separated by categories. We would understand what's happening in each area. Yep.
Yeah, we can absolutely do that.
Are there any other questions from council? Okay. Well, thank you, Mr. Kelly. We do appreciate your quarterly reports and updates. And I do have a resolution, and I will be looking for a mover. Lethbridge Land Q4 2020 Activity Report. Would anybody like to move this resolution?
Carlson.
Okay, Councillor Carlson, thank you. Be it resolved that the Economic Standing Policy Committee receive the report as information. Moved by Councillor Carlson. Any discussion?
Thanks, Mayor Spearman. Thank you, Mr. Kelly. We do appreciate the updates, especially coming much more frequently than this. I also appreciate your request for members of council to provide feedback. It may take one or two of these updates under our belts before we think of other things we may want to see provided. So I appreciate the work, and I'd ask my colleagues for support.
Thank you. Any questions? Any debate? All in favor? Any opposed? That is unanimous. Thank you. We'll now move on to the final presentation. The build request for 50% tax relief on vacant residential lots. And it's my understanding that Bridget Mearns, the CEO of Build Lethbridge, is available on Teams to participate on this item? So we have a presentation submitted by Mr. Bazunas. Is Mr. Bazunas or anybody else prepared to lead this presentation? Okay.
Mr. Mayor, I'm here. I've made the submission, and I think council has seen most of it twice already, but I'm going to just let Bridget speak to it, and then we'll be available here to answer your questions. So
okay,
take it away, Bridget.
Okay.
Thank you. Yes, just to bring you some background, because it's been a while since we talked about this. Way back in July 13th, we were actually before that, we were asked to come up with ideas that would help the industry move forward through the pandemic. And we came up with a number of things. One was pouring our own aprons, and thank you very much. Council approved that. The other one was the consideration of the tax treatment for vacant serviced land. So this isn't land that's raw, that's being farmed. This is land where the services have already come to those lots, but they're sitting there waiting to be built on. Because the industry has had a significant slowdown, and because those lots don't draw from any city services, the premise around this is that vacant service land would be treated differently and taxed differently because of its lower impact, and that would decrease the carrying cost to the developers, which over time would help manage the cost of land.
Okay, thank you for that. Questions from council?
Carlson here.
Okay, Councillor Carlson and then Councillor Kaufman. Okay, Councillor Carlson, please proceed.
Thank you, Mayor Spearman. If I can through you to Mr. Bazunas, who I think provided the report to us. And I think at our first presentation, I think is when or last meeting when this first came to us, we heard that other communities actually do the opposite of this. And maybe I'm misheard. That other communities actually increase the taxable portion to incentivize development. Has that changed, or did I mishear
that? Mayor Spearman, through to Councillor Carlson, if I may. Yeah, there is municipalities. I don't have the list in front of me of all the ones that do it, but there are municipalities out there that increase the property tax mill rate associated with vacant land to incentivize, like you said, to develop on vacant properties and to fill in areas that are maybe have empty spots throughout a certain area.
Gotcha. So do we know what would be recognized as best practice? I don't know if we heard of other communities that give a cut, but perhaps there are some out there. But we did hear of other communities that increase the mill rate to incentivize development. Do we know what is looked at as best practice, if that's even a term that could be applied to this?
We'd probably have to do some additional research on that to find comparators with other municipalities and what they're doing. I don't have that handy in front of me.
Okay, thank you. And I think it's in the presentation, but my computer died, unfortunately, so I can't call it up. But one of the options is to implement this and shift the burden to the rest of the tax base. What would be the cost to the average homeowner to give the developers a break, but shift the tax to the rest of the community?
Actually, I believe Councillor Carlson says in there recommends taking from MRSR for the term of this.
Thank you, Councillor Carlson. Sorry.
If I may, Councillor Carlson, so there is a few options that are proposed in the presentation. One option would be to have the individual developers come forward to council and request tax cancellation. And in that instance, then we would require a funding source to fund those tax cancellations, given that we don't have a write-off of that significant amount currently. So that was one option that's included in the submission. In the instance of reallocating to the remaining class in terms of property owners, it really will depend on when we finalize the assessment of each class and each subclass, but it's approximately about between a 0.25 and a 0.35% upwards tax pressure.
Okay, so one of the options was to shift it to the rest of the community. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Councillor Kaufman, I believe that whether you take it from MRSR or any other source, that is the ultimate source of that is tax as well. So it's once you use it here, it's not available in other places.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Councillor Kaufman thanks you.
Yeah, Councillor Kaufman.
Thank you, Mayor Spearman. Thank you, Ms. Mearns. It's a thought or it's a suggestion at the moment that 3 years be the length of the program. But I think the underlying argument right now is the necessity to do this to address the issues related to COVID. Is that correct? So build would be okay if we implemented this as a one-time strategy with the potential of looking at an extension or expansion beyond the program. Then correct?
Yeah, that would be ideal. Originally, it came up as an opportunity to help the development industry that's obviously been extremely hard hit. There is an expectation that development is going to be slower. This land is going to be sitting vacant longer. But the underlying argument is this land draws less services from the city, though it's paying as though it is drawing as any other lot would. Okay, so the taxation then it works out approximately, and this is a ballpark average. It works out to about $1,100 a lot, correct? The numbers that we've 750 RL, basically looking at single family lots, 750 lots, $800,000 in taxation. Do the math, works out to about 1,066. So I'm rounding to 1,100 is an average. Is it your expectation and understanding then that everybody basically will be coming forward to ask this, or is it going to be a situation of some picking and choosing? Well, I guess that we came forward as an industry, so we see this as affecting every developer the same. Certainly, if something isn't blanketly accepted, and council decides that they would look at a program on a case-by-case basis, then perhaps they would. Okay. The idea here, though, is really to soften the blow of the carrying charges and the ultimate cost of the land in the future. Okay, excellent, thank you. Can somebody just identify what the change is then in terms of approximate equality of size moving from, I'm assuming this is moving from farmland or agricultural land to something that's serviced, or I can't think of what the land designation is from what is before something that gets serviced. Are we talking mere dollars difference, or are we talking a significant change?
Well, I can give that a try. So raw developed land is going for somewhere in the range of $50,000 to $55,000 an acre, and you can get about 4 to 5 lots from that. So say 55, so then a lot is worth $11,000 as raw land. A developed lot sells for around $110,000. So the difference is 100 times.
Thank you. But what would the taxation be on that acre?
I don't know the answer to that.
I'm just trying to understand the significance of moving of us as an organization, as well as the request in front of us, of moving from the value of the land as it sits raw, I recognize there's a value to the land being serviced, and that value is only achieved when the land is sold. So the assessed value, if you have a service lot but you don't have a house on it, we're assessing it based on the fact that the lot is serviced, and we don't seem to tie this to the lot actually being sold. And maybe I'm getting on a philosophical. I shouldn't.
Well,
I don't
actually. Yeah, maybe I can help. So the assessed value of a serviced vacant lot is lower than the assessed value of an approved lot. In other words, one with a house on it. And it's been our estimate that while it's true that a vacant lot doesn't draw as much on municipal services, taxable services, in its vacant state, that's reflected in the fact that the assessment is lower. And so the tax bill for that lot is lower today than when a home is constructed, and the assessment obviously goes up, and by extension, the tax bill goes up. So that would be our view, is that draw on services is reflected in the current way in which we assess and ultimately tax vacant property versus improved property. The contention that Ms. Mearns is making, that there should be a further reduction in assessment to reflect a lack of services that are demanded, is again that's a political one. That's a value judgment. I think our current tax structure, accounts for that. Our current assessment approach accounts for that already.
Let me just clarify, and forgive me if I've misspoken, but we're talking about the tax rate, not the assessment. The land is assessed at what the land is assessed at. It's what it's taxed at. We're asking it not be taxed the same as a lot that would have a house on. Obviously, the assessment goes up because of the value of the house. But they're taxed the same.
There is a direct relationship, though, and Haley can assist in terms of that. The tax. No, the tax rate is a. Sorry, go ahead.
I do understand the difference between assessment and tax rate and the mill rate in between. I'm assuming then we don't have a class that moves from raw undeveloped land to service land to something with a house on it. Once it's serviced, it falls under the same class, but it's just assessed differently. We don't have a house on it, so it's just the price of land. That's the mechanism that I think we need to address, but that's not what's in front of us. Thank you for that clarification. Thank you, Mayor Spearman.
Okay. Thank you. I'm just going to ask a follow-up question. Are there various states of servicing in development? So are there, if we look at various developments around the city, are some more developed than others?
I would say that in general, when we're talking about land that Bridget and land developers are looking at, we go from raw farmland to fully serviced lots. So they would have everything that you need to build on. So you would have water, sewer, storm service, electrical and gas and telecommunications, and a road in front of you. So that's where we go to. If there are others, but they're exceptional. There are exceptions to the rule rather than the rule.
And currently, the differences in the stages of development are recognized in the assessed value of the land. Is that correct?
So you go from being assessed as farmland to being assessed as developed land or serviced land. Those are the two classes, and then it doesn't matter after that. Your mill rate's the same whether you have a house on it or no house on it.
Okay, there's no classification for half developed, or does the assessment reflect that?
As far as I can recall, no. But when I did build my house, I remember that they did adjust the assessment as we were going along with the draws. So I didn't have to pay the full value of my constructed house the first year because it took me more than that to build it.
Okay, thank you. Okay, are there other questions from council? I see
Councillor Carlson.
Councillor Carlson?
And Campbell.
Oh, sorry, Mark.
And Ms. Mearns may want to answer at this stage as well. Ms. Mearns, did you want to say something at this stage?
Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to address Jeff Carlson's comment about where in other municipalities it's the opposite. I know in St. Albert it is the opposite, but they have entirely different development community. Our developers don't want to develop land and sit on it. That's just not their business model. They want to service it, and they want to build it to sell it to builders or people. But really, their purpose is they're not building these out to just sit on them. They would build them out to sell them, and this is how they address the market, and they adjust what they bring on accordingly. And then the other thing I wanted to talk about was the original request was that there would be a separate category for this land, this type of land. Basically, think of it as a phase that's not yet built on. So it's sort of that in between. It's not drawing from any services like a lot waiting to be built on that's been bought and a permit would be treated.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Pinkson, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I just got an email back from the Assessment and Tax Department and just commented that most, typically it's vacant land is taxed at the same as the residential.
Okay.
Same mill rate.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Campbell.
Thank you, Your Worship. I don't know who can answer this. In the history of Lethbridge, has there ever been a precedent set of a 50% tax relief in any way? Maybe going back to the last pandemic. I don't know. Is there anything at all that we've ever seen?
Council.
Okay. Ms. Pinkson, what have we done in the last 100 years?
I haven't been here for 100 years, but no, I'm not aware of that. It's always been the same tax rate as far as I'm concerned, as far as I know.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Carlson.
You want another?
Oh, you've got an answer. I'm sure you do, Belinda.
Tax breaks have been given to various things 100 years ago, the woolen mill, the CPR station, etc. But they were usually very political in nature and done for very deliberate reasons of trying to get those organizations into the city.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Carlson.
Thanks, Mayor Spearman. Perhaps I just need some clarity because going back about 10 years ago, I had discussions around this exact topic with the then president of, I think it was the Home Building Association of Lethbridge. And they kept saying the same thing, that our empty lots don't use municipal services. Why are we having to pay any taxes? And I asked them the question, I said, what don't you use? He said, well, garbage, recycling. And I said, well, you don't pay for that through your taxes. That's your utility bill. And so I just need clarity on what services, if we put roads and streets and infrastructure out to these lots, what services aren't they utilizing? Because we get calls about empty lots all the times, and we need to send folks out there and do things. And so I'm just not, I'm trying to think of what services they don't use.
So there's no snow clearing, there's no street cleaning. They're not drawing on any of the grids or any of the other utilities, and I recognize there's a user pay component to that as well. Basically, it's the property is maintained by the developer. It's not maintained by the city.
Okay. So, snow and ice control.
Councillor Kaufman, if I could just, or sorry, Councillor Carson, you're too many Jeffs, but too many JCs there. But if I can help, there's a number of tax-related services that people who would live in a house don't access if they're not living in that house. Of course, the assumption there would be that these would be new people to the community rather than people moving and reducing the density in some other part of the city. So you don't use the parks if you're not living in the house, right? So those sorts of things. So there is some kind of idea that that could be potentially part of it.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions from council at this point? Councillor Kaufman?
Thank you, Mayor Spearman. Ms. Mearns, is this greenfield only, or would it be infill as well? I recognize council would set the policy or the program, but is the consideration to be on greenfield only, or is it include infill?
Originally, the program was to be, well, it's developed land, so it's not greenfield, but yes, new areas.
Okay, all right, thank you, Mayor Spearman.
Okay. Any further questions from council? I see none at this stage. So with that, we can move to the resolution. Okay, who would like to move the resolution?
Kaufman, I can do that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Kaufman. Bill request for 50% tax relief on vacant residential lots. Be it resolved that the Economic Standing Policy Committee receive the report as information. Councillor Kaufman.
Thank you, Mayor Spearman. Thank you, Ms. Mearns, for the presentation, for the information. What I'll do is I will bring forward a motion for the next council meeting because we can't just leave it here and not move on. We have to make a decision on it, and council can deliberate what's been put in front of us and come to some sort of decision either way at the next meeting of council. So you can let your membership know that we'll take care of that then. Other than that, if there's any question or any comments, entertain that, or I'll call the question.
I see no comments. Question has been called. All in favor? Are any opposed? There are none. This motion is carried. Thank you. Unanimous.
Thank you.
Okay, now we have the addition to the agenda, which is invitation to Lethbridge and District Exhibition to present to Economic Standing Policy Committee, moved by Councillor Kaufman. Councillor Kaufman, did you want to say anything at this stage? You go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Spearman. Just quickly to my colleagues, apologize for the late submission, but this is based on the conversation we had at City Council yesterday. And one of the suggestions that was made is that the exhibition come and do a presentation on a regular basis to this Standing Policy Committee. And so this is the opportunity to actually move forward in that. And basically the motion says that starting in March, we ask for a representative of the Lethbridge and District Exhibition to come and do a monthly presentation to us on the current condition or state of the Exolution construction project. I've got it listed as a representative, so we could have the chair of the board, we could have a member who's steering the construction committee, we could have the executive director. It leaves it kind of open depending on schedules, but this way we're getting that connection that Councillor Higgins or Acting Mayor Higgins' motion was attempting to create or capture yesterday.
Okay, thank you.
Open it for debate. Thank you.
Okay, I'll read the resolution. Invitation to Lethbridge and District Exhibition to present to Economic Standing Policy Committee. Be it resolved that beginning in March 2021, the Economic Standing Policy Committee invite a representative of the Lethbridge and District Exhibition to present on a monthly update on the Exolution construction project. Thank you. Okay, questions from council? There are none. I think Councillor Kaufman did a good job of explaining the resolution. Councillor Campbell.
Councillor Campbell has a question.
I just, it's just, is 1 month a little bit too much? I know it's a construction project. I mean, I can go either way, but it just seems, I wonder when you're doing a construction project of that magnitude, if you come every month for it, is that a little bit too much? I can give them. I don't. That it was in my head. That's all. If anyone wants to answer that.
Yeah. Do you know what? Thank you, Councillor Campbell. I had that same question, and this was in my head yesterday as we were discussing or debating the motion in front of council. I'm certain that both the exhibition as well as this SPC will have the understanding that if there's nothing to report, there is nothing to report. What it does is it creates the mechanism, it creates the agenda item monthly for there to be the communication between the two. As Mr. Dalton identified in conversation yesterday, we may have some sort of administrative representation on there. So we will certainly understand or get the heads up if there are updates. I think, and this is just my overlay, I think the opportunity for the exhibition to come forward and talk about this project every month through construction is actually something that they may take advantage of. However, as I say, we all recognize if there's nothing to report, it doesn't serve our time, it doesn't serve the exhibition's time and come and do a presentation. But I think that's something that we all as mature adults can certainly understand. It's about creating the process and the mechanism for them to come. So thank you for that. I struggle with that as well.
No, you sold me. That's good. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Councillor Carlson?
Oops, thanks, Mayor Spearman. I had actually similar thoughts, but I was just wondering, and unfortunately I can't see the resolution. It says invited to present.
Yeah, invite a representative of the Lethbridge exhibition and district exhibition to present a monthly update on the exhibition construction project. So if they choose to not come monthly and come quarterly, great. I think that's what Councillor Kaufman said. Yeah.
Thank you. But there would still be the opportunity. I'm just hopeful this isn't excluding the opportunity to send a report rather than have someone come down in person.
Yes, the reason present isn't it because I considered submit, but the reason is it goes back to the conversation we had yesterday about the opportunity to ask questions about it. And again, $42.8 million of taxpayer money is involved in this, and of municipal taxpayer money is involved in this, and so it's important that we have that ability to have the conversation. So present, again, if it's a submission, if nobody is available to come because of the timing of the meeting or whatever, I think we will accept that. This is about creating the format and the forum and the opportunity to engage.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And thank you for bringing this forward.
Thank you. Any further questions from council? I see nothing at this stage. Any debate? I see none. Councillor Kaufman?
Actually, Councillor Campbell put his hand up.
I just appreciate your explanation of, and the fact that bringing it forward continues to create what could be excitement and keeping it in the forefront for the exhibition. So I do like the idea of it. At the very least, have them present, even if they have to say there's nothing to tell us about it. But a reminder that this is still ongoing. So I do like that. Thanks.
Okay. Have called the questions called at this stage? All in favor? Any opposed? There are none. Thank you. That's unanimous.
Mayor Spearman, Councillor
Yes.
Carlson here. Just a quick thought. With the amount of folks that have been popping in and popping out and not on video or speaking at all, I'm just always concerned about having quorum. I'm just wondering, in cases where we know people are leaving, if we could do recorded votes just to ensure that we have quorum.
If that's what council wants, sure.
I'm just not sure how to check if we have quorum. I know we've had several people leave, and I just don't know that I'm assuming we still have quorum. I just never know.
Okay, so we're about to deal with adjournment. If we don't have quorum, we just guess the motion will
we stay forever.
we can try it with the adjournment motion, and we'll do that by roll call. So who would like to move to adjourn?
I will.
Councillor Croson? Hey, Councillor Croson, move to adjourn, that we do now adjourn the meeting of the Economic Standing Policy Committee until Wednesday, March the 10th, 2021, and we'll vote by roll call.
Councillor Carlson.
Agreed.
Councillor Campbell.
In favor.
Deputy Mayor Sherrill is absent. Councillor Morrow.
Yep.
Councillor Croson.
In favor.
Acting Mayor Higgin.
I'd like to stay longer, actually. No, I'm in favor.
Councillor Parker. Councillor Kaufman.
In favor.
Mayor Spearman.
In favor.
That passes 7-0.
So we have quorum.
Yay.
Okay, and we can have roll call votes in future if that's the wish of council.
It was only a concern because I knew people had disappeared, so I was trying to count.
Okay, thank you.
One of the things that Councillor Croson and I are looking at with the procedure bylaw is how to deal with this very issue. It's obviously COVID, but post-COVID, there's still the opportunity to participate electronically. And then it comes down to the question of, is your camera on for it? You are to be present, and you can see that people are at least present. So that's something I think we'll have to delve a little deeper into in order to address that concern. Because you're right, Councillor Carlson, if everybody had their cameras on, we'd know who's here. But we have to be prepared for other options. I know Councillor Morrow participates via phone, but we know that he's here as well. So,
Councillor Carlson, if I may, and Mayor Spearman, if I may just jump.
Did he leave?
Just 1 second. If we can let the clerk respond here for a second, there may be a procedural thing that he can enlighten us on.
Just jumping in here as well. We monitor the Teams call as well, and at all times the clerk of the meeting will correspond with the chair as well to advise if we go through any loss of quorum as well, and have the chair advise the rest of the body.
Any comments from members?
Nope. I just appreciate the discussion, that especially that we're looking at how to change things, because just because you're on a Teams call doesn't mean you're actually there. I think.
Okay. Acting Mayor Higgin.
Thank you. Actually, a lot of the time, depending on the quality of the internet that you have, a lot of times it's better to turn off your video so you can hear people better, because I found a lot of times, and yes, I'm actually on all the time that I'm on, but if there's too many videos going on, sometimes it'll stagger. So if people shut the video off, it's a lot easier to hear what's being presented. So if that's the reason why a lot of time I'm not on as far as video, but hopefully you can see me now. I'm here. So yeah, it's just as far as internet quality is a concern at times.
Okay.
Yeah, and bandwidth is a huge issue, especially right now, because I know I'm on, but I know my neighbors all up and down the street are on as well. So that's something we have to learn to navigate. And maybe it's the roll call votes on everything. Maybe that's the way we go for now. But thank you. It's something that it's something that's come up. So we'll keep addressing it.
Yep. And if we wish to, what I heard was Councillors Croson and Kaufman would look at this, and perhaps we will require roll call votes in future, and we'll wait for that recommendation. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Have a good evening, everyone.